Donald Trump's principal occupation is defendant. He spent his first couple of years after leaving the presidency as a civil defendant, and then last year became a criminal defendant for the first time in his life on April 4th, and just 4 months later, he became a criminal defendant for the fourth time in his life. If Donald Trump becomes president again, he can make 2 of the 4 criminal prosecutions he is facing disappear. But the rest of defendant Trump's criminal and civil cases would simply be put on pause for 4 years. In June of this year, Donald Trump will turn 78 years old. He could be convicted of crimes by then or shortly after his June 14th birthday. 78-year-old Donald Trump will appeal every criminal and civil verdict against him. The state and federal appeals court process could easily use up the rest of a 78-year-old's life. And so the title Defendant Trump will be the longest held title of Donald Trump's life. Tonight, we will consider the status of the most important cases defendant Trump is facing, including the most important constitutional questions that defendant Trump has raised, which one appeals court judge framed as, can the president of the United States be criminally prosecuted for ordering SEAL Team 6 to assassinate his political opponents? Donald Trump's lawyers said, no, the president cannot be prosecuted for assassinating his political opponents unless he has already been convicted of the same charge in a Senate impeachment trial. The most constitutionally important civil case that Donald Trump is currently litigating is his appeal to the United States Supreme Court asking to overturn the Colorado Supreme Court's decision to ban Donald Trump from the presidential ballot. We will consider those cases tonight through the lens of law professor Andrew Weissman's legal scholarship, as well as the wisdom of 3 Pulitzer Prize-winning historians who are experts on the clauses of the Constitution that Donald Trump is now clinging to, trying to redefine through the appeals process. The cases that are going to live the longest in the life of defendant Trump are probably the civil cases he is facing. He is facing multiple lawsuits by Capitol Police officers for injuries they suffered on January 6th. The verdicts in that lawsuit could cost Donald Trump hundreds of millions of dollars for each injury. A civil jury in Washington, D.C. returned a verdict of $148 million against Rudolph Giuliani for the defamation of 2 election workers in Georgia. How much would a jury in the same courthouse return in damages to police officers who were nearly beaten to death? The appeals process in civil cases like that can, in effect, be endless, because once defendant Trump has exhausted all of his appeals on the merits of the case, the Capitol Police officers who might win massive judgments against him could spend many, many more years in court trying to collect those judgments, which is an entirely different legal process of its own. That could also be the case with the trial that finally came to an end today in New York City, the civil fraud case the Attorney General of New York prosecuted against Donald Trump. The Attorney General is asking now for $370 million in fines against Donald Trump, which, if imposed, Donald Trump will surely spend the rest of his life in court trying not to pay. The trial ended today in Trumpian style, which is to say full of ridiculous goofiness and unprofessionalism of both Donald Trump and his lawyers. Donald Trump's lawyers did not request a jury trial in the case, but that didn't stop them or Donald Trump from complaining that they weren't getting a jury trial that they specifically did not request. That is as goofy as lawyering gets. The lawyers Donald Trump paid chose not to have a jury trial. For Donald Trump to complain about not having a jury trial is for Donald Trump to confess that he is the single stupidest client ever to appear in that courtroom. Days ago, Donald Trump claimed that he wanted to present himself the final arguments in this case. The judge in the case went along with that game and imposed, of course, the standard rules for such presentations, the same rules that apply to lawyers in court, which Donald Trump refused to agree to. The judge then let Donald Trump speak today anyway, since it doesn't matter because there's no jury present and no one could be unduly influencing a judge by the irrelevant rantings of a 77-year-old man who doesn't know what the word relevant means.